Hey, welcome back. Are you a jack of many trades? Do you have more than one passion? Our next guest is a man of passion and a man of talents. This guy is a lawyer, an author, an inventor. You name it, he can do it. Today, we're going to talk about all those things. My name is Vin DeQuino. His name, Karl Milde.
How do you do, Vinny?
Karl, we've been friends a long time.
Yes.
You and I exchange manuscripts. We read each other's work in the early stages. I am a Milde fan. Talk to me about what you're doing,
Okay.
what you've done.
Yes.
Who are you?
Okay. Thank you, Vinny. I am a patent attorney. I went to MIT, studied engineering, then I studied law, and got a degree in law. So I combined the two. I service my clients. I get patents for them. I enforce the patents, but I also make inventions too.
Yeah.
And I've made, I've
So
got
you're
about
your own client.
Yes, in a way. It's a lot cheaper that way.
Yeah.
I got about 35 patents.
Wow.
Recently, I've gotten 20 patents on ways to make guns safer.
That's a good thing.
Yes, what I've done is combine the conventional cell phone with a gun, and they work together to keep the gun from shooting if it's aimed at you. If you're not the owner of the gun, or you're not authorized to use the gun, it won't shoot.
Wow. So if
So
I steal the gun from you and try to shoot it, I can't?
it won't hurt me. You can shoot at somebody else, but
Wow.
it's using pattern recognition, facial recognition, to see that I'm here, and it won't shoot me. So
Wow.
that's just one of the
Okay.
great features that you could use the cell phone for. So after making a lot of inventions, I started writing stories. And my first story was about an 11-year-old boy called Jason.
And that's not a coincidence.
No, it's not at all, because I had an 11-year-old boy called Jason. He's in 6th grade. He invents every different story, and I've written 5 of them. Every different story, he makes another invention. So in the first story, he invents a air-powered bicycle. And there's a bicycle race, which he doesn't win because he crashes. But the story is really about somebody stealing a trophy from the school trophy case. And Jason and his friends, Matt and Luke, find out who did it. That's this first book.
Ah, okay.
Jason and the Detectives.
Excellent.
So then I went to write another book about Jason. This one is Jason and the Haunted Summer Camp. Jason goes to summer camp after 6th grade. And then I just continued writing about Jason. I wrote 5 more stories, 5 more Jason books. And then I said, maybe it's time for me to write a book for adults. And so I wrote about an inventor called Karl.
Another coincidence.
Another coincidence. He has a son, Bruce, and Karl and his son, Bruce, hijack a commuter train to New York City. So here's the book. It's called The Commuter Train. It's about a hijacking of a train to New York City. And the hero is Karl, as I mentioned, but the heroine is Julie Gables, who is a journalist and finds out why Karl did this. So, second adult book comes along, and it's about Julie Gables, and she starts a blog, a news blog, and she investigates corruption. And in this case, she finds out that somebody wants to blow up West Point. Believe it or not, there's a train that goes right underneath West Point, and this is a picture of West Point. And some Russian terrorists have put a bomb on a train, and it's going to go underneath West Point and blow up. So that's that story. Then I turned to the Lone Ranger. Was a great character that I heard of on the radio. I listened every week to the Lone Ranger stories. And it so inspired me that I wrote about a updated Lone Ranger called the Road Ranger. In this case, it's a character called Tom Swift, who's kind of a Bruce Wayne kind of character who has a big trucking company, and he travels the highways of the United States on the interstate and helps people along the way. So that's the Road Ranger.
Mm-hmm.
So now we come to the last book that I've just written.
Yeah.
And you helped me with it.
Yeah, and I've been reading it. You know, I kind of read it as you wrote it.
Yes.
Totally non-Karl Milde.
Right. Totally. Yes.
Totally different book. What inspired you to change course?
Okay. It's a change of course, yes, but you got to remember I like new things, inventions.
Yep.
So in this case, my character, and I love her, her name is Courtney Stillwell.
Mm-hmm.
She has had a terrible thing happen in college that happens to many girls. And she can't, act in a normal way because of what's happened. Mm-hmm. The story is about how she has a character arc and is able to find romance at the end. And get rid of this thing that's been running her, and I call it revenge therapy.
Yeah. Now, you seem reluctant to say what actually happened to her.
Well, she was gang raped, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's important that we need to know that.
Yes.
So she has this hanging over her.
Right.
But the book is called Women Rising. Women Rising.
Women Rising, yes.
And the thing about it is that she rises from what happened to her.
Right.
And I think that's the strength of this book, because it shows that it's not
overcome.
over. You can overcome.
Right.
And as difficult as it may be, and it's difficult,
but she
have
gets
to
help.
Move forward.
She founds a magazine. She calls it Women Rising. It's a feminist magazine to get the word out to women that men are aggressors in many ways. She isn't overbearing about it, but that's her quest at the beginning. And
she does have a panel of women she works with, her
that's
board,
right,
that
her
are
board of directors.
all women.
Yes.
And they're sympathetic to her cause.
That's right.
And they know her background.
Right. And they want to help her in every way.
And they work together. And the magazine is similar to...
Well, Ms. Magazine, really.
Yeah.
She's like a Germaine Greer kind of a character. So she's a lovely woman, but she does have this thing in her past that runs her. So let me put this...
So the book goes along, and there's a subplot, a very interesting subplot. And that's where she gets involved.
Right. She gets a call, she's in her office, she gets a call from one of her writers, a very young writer who's sort of like a redneck girl. She has a biker for a boyfriend, but she finds out that her boyfriend has been in a U.S. government experiment to see if this stuff would work. And what is this stuff? It's called NEMO, or NEMAO, Women Rising. Well, women spelled backwards. Women is NEMAO. NEMAO is women spelled backwards. Okay. However, he calls it balls off because it makes him more passive. It makes him more peaceful. And
now we should mention that this book is not a young adult book. It's not for kids.
That's right.
This is truly an adult book.
Yes.
And the topic is definitely adult.
The topic is, to be in the vernacular, it's sex. What drives people, what the relationship between the sexes is really kind of about sex.
Sex.
Ronnie is disappointed that her boyfriend doesn't come on to her.
Right.
And she wants to publicize why. To her, it's terrible that her boyfriend is the way he is now. Yeah. So she tells Courtney, our heroine, that she wants to write an article for the Women Rising talking about this stuff called NEMAO. And Courtney thinks, well, it's really not from, well, she writes an article, and the article's in the book. And she feels it's inappropriate for her Women Rising magazine, so she calls her friend, who's the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine, which really extols women in a very feminine way. The women who read Cosmo have accepted being women. Mm-hmm. They like being women, and they have no qualms about talking about sex and having a sexual relationship with a boy. So the article seems to be well for Cosmopolitan magazine, but now the problem is it's a secret U.S. Army program. Nobody is supposed to know about this stuff. It's going to be used against the enemy to make the enemy passive and not want to fight. So if the enemy's drinking the water with the Nemo in it, the enemy will be relaxed. They won't want to fight, and hopefully even
so it's supposed to curb aggression.
It curbs aggression, and you can't fight a war unless you have aggression. So that's the story in a nutshell. It's also a romance story because Courtney, as she heals, she finds that she'd like to have a normal relationship with a male. And so then she goes on a quest to find the right guy.
And there the plots meet.
Yes.
Because the man that she finds is actually involved in this whole Nemo thing.
Right.
And we don't want to give away the ending.
Right.
But there's actually two men involved.
Right. There's another fellow who actually was a witness to the rape, but he froze and he couldn't do anything, and he feels terribly guilty about that. So when Courtney finally contacts him and says, I need some help, financial help, he has in the meantime started a hedge fund and has become very wealthy, and he supports her and he likes her and he wants to have a relationship with her. So she already has a suitor right away. Yeah. But she is unsure that this is the right guy.
Yeah. And there's a number of circumstances. She goes away with him and she gets to try to know him.
Right.
The other fellow.
Yes, his name is Roger.
Yep.
He is the inventor of this Nemo. He is a top scientist for the government. They had hired him to develop this stuff, which he does, and successfully so. So Roger then is asked to take this to Syria several times to the battlefield to see what he can do with it. And that's sort of a subplot, but puts him in danger. In Syria, he and his group are, I would say, betrayed by a double agent who was originally a friend of Roger's, but then the Syrian government soldiers find out that he's there and attack. So there's that.
So then there's also the issue of the article. If this article comes out,
yes,
Roger's in deep doo.
Yes, right.
And
his whole
so is the
reputation
government.
would be ruined. Yes, and the government program would be in jeopardy, and also the president for even considering using this on the enemy. So the president's very role as president could come crashing down. There's a lot at stake in not having the word get out that this stuff exists.
And yet, this magazine kind of has the right to do it.
Nobody, they don't have the right, but how can I explain? People do it anyway, and they get away with it.
Yep.
Like the Pentagon Papers.
So she, and being the woman that she is,
yes,
she is determined to write it anyway.
Right, exactly.
So Roger has to kind of figure out how to get her to not do that.
Yes. Yeah.
And in doing that, they really get to know each other.
Right. And Roger, she helps Roger, and Roger helps her. This is where she gets her revenge on the guys that did it. And Roger's part and parcel of that. And so is George, the other fella, who she had turned to for help. Between Roger and George, she has two really great men.
But then George gets himself in trouble a little bit with her.
Yes.
And gets on the bad side of her.
Right.
Being who she is, she's very careful about being used or abused by men again.
Right.
So George kind of messes up a little bit, which opens the door for Roger.
Yeah, yeah. Well, she actually...
You know this book as well as you do.
You do. You really helped me write. You don't know that whenever you said, I don't like this, I'd fix it.
Yeah.
You know, you are the mentor to many writers with the Mayapack Writers Group.
It's one of the reasons, Carl, that I do what I do. It's so interesting to get inside a writer's head and to get inside of the process. People don't understand that you don't just sit there and write a book. It just comes out of your brain, and there it is on there. That it's a process. And you have to be able to look at your characters as people.
Right.
And
you
you have
love
to
your
understand.
characters.
Yeah. I mean, there were some things, I'll be honest with you, that I looked at and said, Carl, this can't be, man.
That's right.
And we looked at it together. Some of the things you said, yes, it can. And some of the things you did anyway.
Right.
Because it's your book.
Right.
But to have someone to bounce off of is very important for an author.
It is.
And
it was
some
priceless
authors
for me.
forget that.
Yeah.
And in this day and age of self-publishing, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Because when you don't have an editor to stand over you and say, this doesn't work, pal.
Right.
You know, or say, hey, this does work.
Right.
You know, it's important to have feedback.
Well,
so you're good. You're good
after
with
I
that.
wrote the book, I found an editor. Her name was Pam, and she edited the book twice. First, she took out all the typographical and other kinds of mistakes, and then she started telling me about things that didn't work, that we both missed.
Yeah. And,
Like-
and that happens.
Yes.
And not only that, even the small editorial things.
Yes.
You have two ands in a row. You read that thing 50 times.
That's right.
And you never see it. And then all of a sudden someone goes, do you know you have two ands
Right.
in a row here? And you go, oh my God, how
Or
could I possibly have missed that?
you used a word several times in the same paragraph, like let's say distress.
Yeah.
You get to like that word, so you use it again and again.
Yeah.
And you should use it only once in a paragraph.
Well, that's what the Mayapack Writers Workshop is about too.
Yeah.
These guys are getting real good at this stuff, you know, and you know they say things that you ordinarily would miss. You know, the other day, one of the writers said, "You realize you have Billy, Jimmy, Bobby, Joey. They're all E, and they get confusing.
Yes.
And I can't keep the character straight." And the writer said, "Wow, I did that."
Right.
You don't even see
It's
it.
subconscious.
Yeah, and you just do it.
Yes.
So you have to be very careful, and it's good to have someone over your shoulder.
Right.
I call it the phantom editor, you know. And after a while, these workshop people are getting good at it,
Right.
you know, and that's exactly what they do. And then the writers learn about the phantom editor.
Right.
They begin to say, what would Bob say?
Yeah.
What would Carl say?
That's right. They
What
don't
would
wanna
this
be-
one say?
They know that there's somebody looking at this.
Yeah.
And they want to write it.
Yeah, and you did that for me as well.
Yes.
When I sent my manuscript to you, I mean, there were times when you picked up things and I said, "Oh my God, you're right,"
Right.
and I didn't see it either. And there were times when I disagreed, which is okay.
Yes.
You know, you have to agree to disagree. You know, and you also have to have thin skin.
Right.
You can't take
That's
everything
right.
personally.
You do your best, but then you always make mistakes.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why I recommend to writers, young, old, new. I mean, we have writers in that group who published 7, 8 books, and they still come back every week
Right.
because you need another pair of eyes,
Right.
another pair of ears. You know, and you need someone to be able to see and hear what you're doing. Writing is a process.
Right.
It takes time, and you have to be willing to rewrite. You have to be willing to edit. I mean, this book's come a long way.
I would say it was 1.5 times as long when I originally wrote it. I had cut it and cut it and cut it, cut out the fat, and just focused on the story.
Yeah, and it's important also to be able to hear the message.
Yeah.
If I'm writing a book about women, I want a woman reading it.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I want a woman from Cosmopolitan and a woman from Women Rising. I want different points of view.
Yes.
I want people to be able to see things I can't see.
That's what makes it interesting to read.
Of course, and it's going out to the public,
Right.
and it's not going to only one target audience. There's a lot of people out there who are going to be reading and judging your book.
Right. But can I mention,
Yep.
the author of this book is not Karl Milde, it's Lark Edlam, who is my name spelled backwards.
Yeah. It took me a while to figure that out, by the way.
It's a couple of reasons. It's kind of like J.K. Rowling didn't want her real name writing Harry Potter because she wanted to be a non-sex person writing the book. So the same with this. Lark is sort of a asexual kind of a name.
When I did Kiss the Candy Days Goodbye, it was a book about a kid with diabetes.
Right.
And I wanted Vinnie DiQuino on the cover.
Okay.
And my editor said, no. And I said, what? And she said, no, it's too impersonal. And it reveals your sex,
Yeah.
your gender. And I said, yeah. And she said, no. She said, kids with diabetes aren't all boys, and they're not all girls.
Right.
Why don't you simply go with your initials? And we went with V.T. DiQuino.
Okay.
So
And your
can't tell if it's a male or female.
Your email address is
I-
VTD.
I get emails from people who don't know whether I was male or female. Now, originally in the hardcover, my picture was in it, but in the paperback it wasn't.
All right.
So I understand what you're doing. However, you're very willing to admit who you are. Your picture's in the,
Right.
on the cover of his book.
Right.
But I think it's the statement that you're making.
Right.
That this book isn't necessarily all the beliefs of Karl Milde.
Right.
And that some of the scenes are
Pretty
a little
risque.
spicy. Yeah,
Yes.
they're pretty risque.
Yeah.
And so you're a professional,
Right.
and you have to be very careful about what you represent and how you represent it.
Yes.
So, Karl, you are a wonderful writer. I enjoy reading your books.
Thank you.
Where do you go from Women Rising?
Well, I'm writing a sequel. It's
Okay.
called Women Running. And it's what happens when the Russians find out about this Nemo and they steal it.
Whoa.
And they're going to use it in Ukraine to pacify the Ukrainians so that they can take over the Ukraine. However, the Israelis find out about it too. So they want to steal it from the Russians and use it against
my
the
goodness.
Palestinians. So we'll see what happens. It's
And
organic.
then everything gets saved by Trump.
Yes, right.
So yeah, wow, it looks like another political. So is it more political than this?
Oh, much more. Yes. Yeah.
And is there still a love strain?
The book starts out where Courtney and Roger are planning to get married in 2 weeks.
Oh,
so
wow.
the whole book takes place in 2 weeks because
Oh, wow.
it's got to play out in order for them to get married.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to give away any endings, but the title
I don't
again
even know
is
the
Women. I know. I'm in the middle of doing a chapter right now. I've been doing this whole book. I'm writing the final chapter. I don't know.
Right.
You know,
It's called organic writing.
I had a wrestling
you
match
do
in
what,
there.
what feels good, you know.
I wrote this wrestling match and didn't know who was going to win. I had no idea.
Right.
And the characters kind of write the book.
Yes.
You know, your characters become real people, and that's
right.
the strength of what you do.
Right.
Last minute words to that audience out there, Karl. What do you want to say to them?
Oh gosh. Well,
Oh gosh.
I enjoy writing. I enjoy, what I do as a
And you're
patent
going to
attorney.
keep on doing it.
And I'm going to keep on doing it.
And you're going to be a lawyer for a long time yet.
Yes.
So you're going to hang on to both of them.
Right.
And one of the messages is you can do your ordinary profession.
Yes.
And on the side.
Right.
For
Follow
years,
your passion.
I was a school teacher.
Yeah.
I wrote nights and weekends. And eventually I knew I would retire and write and maybe even do a talk show.
Yeah. Or maybe have a
Possible.
writer's group.
A writer's group that I've been doing for 20 years.
Right.
Carl, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Likewise.
You are always a wonderful guest. You're a wonderful writer. Your books are in the library. People should go over, borrow it. They should be using the library anyway. There's so many wonderful authors represented, but they certainly should be reading your early books and your later books. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this show. It has been a pleasure to be here with you. We're going to run the credits.